GPOs.
Okay, thank you. Hello everyone. We are really glad that we have been invited to talk here today at this year's DeepSec. This is Yves Kraft. My name is Emmanuel Willi. We are both penetration testers and security consultants for OneConsult in Switzerland. So our goal for this presentation is to either create some awareness or to give you some good ideas, all depending on the sizes and colors of your hats. Let me get started. Who of you has followed the hacking team incident? Followed as in downloaded all of their data? Some of them, yeah. Or has been exposed? None. Okay. For those unaware, Hacking Team used to be a pretty unethical Italian software company selling all kinds of software to all kinds of people, mostly governments, until they were taken out by a single guy with the handle Phineas Fisher. Now, the interesting thing is Phineas Fisher published some months ago a pretty detailed write-up about the incident. We have here two selected paragraphs from his write-up, and I will give you some seconds to read them through. So, the two things that especially stood out to us were his mentioning of using GPOs in an offensive way, as well as his way of executing malware in the RAM of high uptime servers to gain persistence in Duku2 style, as he names it. So after we read his write-up for multiple times, the idea of distributing malware in a sneaky way to gain persistence in an automated manner kind of stuck to us. So we set ourselves the goal to create a tool which infects domain joined systems using a backdoor in memory of high uptime servers. Steps to undertake on this way to reach that goal were the creation or injection into an existing GPO, the deployment of a run or run once registry key, the linking of the group policy to a domain or arbitrary organizational unit, and then finally waiting for the incoming connections. Let me take a step back. What are group policies for those unaware? The TLDR is group policies allow you to manage all sorts of settings in Microsoft-based infrastructures, such as password policies or Internet Explorer settings, things like that. Basically everything you want to manage centrally if you're a typical lazy sysadmin. So the thing is though with group policies, it tends to get messy. Usually group policies are being stored all over the place. Naming conventions are often not being followed. Very often if we look at Active Directory infrastructures at clients, there's at least one group policy with the name test, and it's being applied to some systems and nobody actually knows what they do. Very often the structures are grown historically. Temporary workarounds are becoming permanent solutions, and thus they are usually not being decommissioned properly. At least in my opinion, group policy settings are pretty hard to read and understand, especially if they're pretty big. It's kind of annoying to find out what they actually do. It's pretty time consuming. And another thing that's quite interesting is we've run into multiple people telling us that there seems to be some condition where you are not allowed to see the content of a group policy even with domain admin privileges. So if anybody has more information of that, we would be really happy to talk to you after the talk. Okay.
Okay, great. So
we had this proof of concept actually up and running. These were basically a few lines of PowerShell code. And as we did not want to reinvent the wheel, we decided to migrate our proof of concept code into PowerShell Empire. PowerShell Empire, for those who are aware of PowerShell Empire, let's have a chat after the talk. For all who don't, PowerShell Empire is an exploitation framework, mostly for post-exploitation purposes, which is purely based on PowerShell. It's module-based, kind of similar to the Metasploit framework you may know, and its communication is all crypto secure. Now, from a forensic point of view, it's really hard to detect PowerShell Empire because we're running with a Windows standard application, which is PowerShell.exe, and all the modules and all the things we execute with Empire is completely in memory. So an antivirus and mitigation software on the clients will have a really hard time to detect this malicious activity. So if you want to learn more about PowerShell Empire, please visit their website or their GitHub, download it, and kudos to Harmjoy, to Enigma and Sixed Up and all those guys putting such a great framework together. And of course, PowerShell is awesome, and building an empire with it even more. And they recently published version 2 of it at DerbyCon conference about 2 months ago, which they merged another project which actually implements a Python version of it, so it isn't purely PowerShell anymore. It supports also Linux and Unix systems with Python agents. Now, let me tell you a little story. Imagine customer engagement, let's say a red team exercise. A customer called us. This engagement may happen or may not happen in a similar way. We get a call from a customer, do a red team exercise, breach our company, and gather our crown jewels, like the CEO told us on the phone. And the crown jewels in this case were represented by a text file called proof.txt, located anywhere on a server in this domain. Let's call the customer corp.com, for instance. Now, as we later discovered, they had a Windows-based infrastructure with a Windows domain controller and Active Directory, and they had segmented their network into various subsegments for the different purposes for servers and departments and so on. So there are a lot of ways to get into companies, of course, and especially into corp.com. We chose the social engineering way, as we knew they use a well-known PDF reader having a buffer overflow condition which we exploited and got the first foothold into the sales department and owned the first box. We did some information gathering and snooped around and found a file, an install script actually, which contained username and password of a local administrator, which we again used in another department, in the IT department, logged on one of their boxes there, and executed Mimikatz and instantly got domain admin credentials for corp.com. Now, referring back to our initial idea with this group policy distribution, we searched for a way to have kind of comfortably manage our target systems of corp.com, and as we already said, place a sneaky backdoor into corp.com. Now, for this, first step is to have PowerShell Empire up and running on our attacker system. We need to start a so-called listener, and we have to execute a launcher, so-called launcher, on our target machine, which actually is the domain controller. this launcher will connect back to us and use kind of a stage technique to deliver the agent of PowerShell Empire on our target machine on the domain controller. So from now on, we do have the possibility and the complete control on the domain controller within PowerShell Empire, and of course on the whole directory structure and GPO organization of corp.com. So to follow our idea, we create a GPO in the Active Directory and distribute it all over corps.com's domain. So let's start with the first part of the demo. We chose the live version for the demo. We hope that will work. We sacrificed enough to the demo gods. What we'll do is the following. First step, we got our foothold and we need to get persistence. So to admit, it isn't really the sneakiest way to do that, but the comfortable one for us. We decided to create a new GPO for corp.com, and we set a run or once key, which will actually trigger a, let's say, a exe or our reverse shell just to survive the next reboot of a machine if the machine gets rebooted. And of course, we need to link the GPO to the whole domain of corp.com and enjoy our backdoor. Now, let's switch to the demo mode. Yes. Das geht nicht, musst du drin. Okay. Window issues. Sorry for that one. Okay. So this is PowerShell Empire console of it. We actually do have already an agent running on the domain controller, and we need to interact with it. And as I said, we use the module to set the registry key for a run key. This is located at persistence, elevated, set GP registry value. And we already pre-filled it with some information to save time. For instance, the GPO name, which will actually be DeepSec, as you see. There will be a run key set for corp.com, which will actually launch a DeepSec demo registry key with a calc.exe. So let's switch to our target machine, transfer it to the beamer. As you can see, proper testing is always good before the presentation. Great. So as you see, this is the group policy management console of Microsoft, of our domain controller. There are actually 4 group policies. It's very hard to read in the back. There are 2 standard Windows group policies. This one for the domain controller and the default domain policy. And there seems to be 2 custom policies from corp.com, one to restrict RDP access and one for base hardening purposes. So let's switch back to our attacker machine and run the module and confirm the OPSEC safe warning. As we'll touch the disk with this attack, there is the warning for that. We instantly get feedback inside of PowerShell Empire that the GPO has been created, and by switching back to our target machine, the domain controller, refreshing the view, we hopefully get a new GPO, great, called DeepSec. If we open it up, there will be a setting for a calc.exe, which will run. Sorry? Mikro besser. Okay. Good, great. So, calc.exe next boot time, great. First part of the demo worked. Now let's switch back to the presentation. And for the setting, we do have domain admin rights. We have our agent running on the domain controller, and we have the persistence. So final step, just search for the file, like the CEO told us, this proof of txt thingy on one of the servers. So we almost called it a day, and Emmanuel already went out to grab 2 beers and celebrate our victory. As I discovered, sneaking into the Active Directory, that corp.com had about 80 to 90 servers. We didn't expect that for a mid-sized Swiss company. So one possibility would be to log in on each and every server and search for the file. Possibility number 2 would be to pretty much automate things, because number 1 wouldn't be our style. So we just took our beer, which we had, we did some brainstorming, and we got back to our boxes and had the idea to open up the WMI port with a group policy to have the firewall bypassed and search for the file remotely. So create a GPO and distribute it to the server's network. This will be the last task. Now, demo time for the part 2. We realized that there is the need to write new Empire modules, and if you remember Phineas Fisher's write-up, that's exactly what he did. So we almost took his idea and would like to show you in the second part of the demo our approach. First thing is to read the existing GPOs. We would like to inject our malicious part into an existing one, so just read out the existing policies. Next step is to create the malicious part of it. This will be a firewall rule to open up the WMI port and apply the group policy to all the systems, to all the servers of corp.com, and use a command to search for the proof.txt. So let's switch again back to PowerShell Empire and launch another module called getGPO to read out the existing GPOs. This will be use module as a command, persistent elevated get GPO. Hitting info or options will give us the possibilities of the modules. As we already pre-configured it, we want to search for all group policies. There will be also the possibility to search for a certain GUID or for a named policy, but for the demo part, we'll use just the all option to read out all group policies. Let's run it, and it hopefully will come back and give all the nice juicy information of corp.com. As you'll see, there are the now 5 group policies. There is also the DeepSec policy we just created a few minutes ago, default domain policy, and so on. And let's say we take the base hardening policy to inject our malicious activities. This is located at the bottom, the last one. Yes, core base hardening. We'll use that one for our firewall module. That's the next module. Use module, again as a command. Use module for persistence elevated new firewall rule. This is again pre-filled with some information to save time. It will create a new firewall rule called DeepSec, and we decided for the demo to go all in and just open up any on the box. As you can see from the options part of the module, pretty much everything which you can set in the GUI is also settable by an option. For instance, if it's inbound or outbound for the direction, local port, remote port, the profile is domain profile, private profile, and so on. TCP as a protocol, and as I said, any to open up any port. So just run the module. Confirm the OPSEC safe warning, will again touch the disk with this module. We instantly get the feedback, which says that the firewall rule has been created. And by switching back to our target victim machine, the domain controller, we'll have a look at this policy. Core-based hardening, the top one. If we have a look at the settings, show all, there will be a new firewall rule called DeepSec, open up any for all TCP ports. So next step, wait 90 minutes. As we did not get a 2-hour slot for our talk and we want to save time, we speed up things and we do have another module. Just to mention, those 90 minutes are Windows-based standard infrastructure intervals, which will apply the existing GPOs to the boxes. So we use our self-written module called invoke GP update, which will actually remotely trigger the GP update on the servers and clients of corp.com. This is also pre-filled with some information. You can set a filter, which actually now is set to distributed to every server and every client in the corp.com domain. And of course, there is the possibility to have a delay. If you don't want to pop every reverse shell in the same second, you'll maybe use this feature to have it in a kind of an interval. We set it to 0 to actually do not wait, hit run, and if we switch back to the domain controller, there will be the update window. Normally this will be hidden if the automated process every 90 minutes will actually be triggered. So if we open up now the Windows Firewall Management console, there will hopefully be a new firewall rule called DeepSec. Let's see, does not work. Again, window issues. Okay, here it is. Advanced Windows Firewall Security, yes. So refreshing the view, hopefully, gonna refresh the view, will hopefully get a new DeepSec, great, DeepSec firewall rule. So this is the proof, let's say, now any is open on every box, every server. So last step for us, search for the file. We already prepared the command for it. So this will be a WMI search. We grabbed the IPs and the host names from the Active Directory, which we'll use in a for loop to search for the file on every computer. And by hitting run, hopefully, we'll get the results. It may take some time. Okay, great. So there will be on the file server, mission accomplished, there is a proof.txt. Now back to the presentation. Let me summarize this attack. Of course, there are solid advantages by using offensive GPOs for an attack. And as I already mentioned, an attacker can act in plain sight. We're using legitimate Microsoft standard procedures for this. So there is no need to install, to download and install further software, and Microsoft standard procedures are just used to distribute our malware. And of course, intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems, monitoring solutions will have a hard time to detect the attack. Defeating barriers such as firewalls and network segments isn't a big thing anymore. Imagine a hardened environment where maybe a remote desktop is restricted, or just other admin interfaces aren't available from each and every machine. GPOs get distributed like a charm, and we don't need any particular bypass. And of course, reaching out every domain joint systems, imaging outsourced IT and supplier systems and so on, isn't a big thing. Now, of course, this is a comfortable way to gain persistence and move around the network. And the best thing to mention, the target victim machine doesn't need to be online during the attack, because at next boot time, the GPO will be distributed like a charm and applied even if the attack happened weeks ago. Now, in Switzerland, and I think in all German-speaking parts of Europe, even in Austria as well, there is a term called the eierlegende Wollmilchsau. You're maybe familiar with that. That's a vernacular expression for a literally fantasy figure, which is kind of an egg-laying pig with a woolen skin, which produces also milk, as a symbol that combination of requirements and features is impossible to have. Now, if an unauthorized third party has domain admin rights in your organization, you're basically screwed anyway. And GPOs isn't the first thing you're going to fix. But there are some ideas, some things you can do actually, some brainstormed ideas. Maybe you'll come up with your own ideas, and maybe you'll share them with us after the talk. Reviewing your GPOs on a regular basis may be a good idea, maybe in an automated manner, of course. Monitoring and intrusion detection is a big thing. So just to log the changes of a GPO and to correlate those logs and analyze those log events would be very important. You maybe want to limit your system administrators' access rights using the least privilege principle. You may implement whitelisting of applications to prevent execution of PowerShell.exe, and of course a health information security ecosystem is a good idea anyway. The point is, it kind of tends to an arms race, because if we implement some countermeasures, the attacker side will find a way to bypass it. We recently were at HACLU in Luxembourg security conference, and Saumil Shah gave a presentation called InfoSec Crossroads. By the way, he'll have a talk afterwards this afternoon about his Stegosploit project. In Luxembourg, he talked about the 7 axioms of security. If you don't want to end up in this rabbit hole and in this arms race, we really recommend to view his talk and to have a new view about security and his 7 axioms. Now, we progressed a lot in our development, and we implemented already some of the modules we like to implement. We already saw some in the demos. Of course, we would like to cover even more attack vectors and implement more PowerShell modules related to GPOs. And we'll also publish them. One of them is in the pull request, in an official pull request to be integrated in PowerShell Empire. The other one you'll find at the GitHub repository of OneConsult, and we'll finally do some code cleanup, and we'll publish the rest of the modules as well. So I think we're pretty much done. If you have any concerns or any further ideas, please contact us in any way you like. And I think, thank you for your attention at this time. If there are any questions, I would be happy, or we would be happy to answer them right now. Are there any?
You mentioned whitelisting as one of the countermeasures. Do you have any experience how the whitelist information is pushed out to all the clients? Is this also via GPOs, or is this, so maybe you just have to set both stuffs there, the whitelisting and push the exe?
I guess this depends on the kind of solution that you're implementing.
Okay, but you haven't checked what AppLock is doing and what McAfee is doing. You haven't checked that. Okay.
No, we haven't exclusively looked at that. But I mean, there's ways to get around whitelisting. So it's just one stick in the attacker's path of many. So we just try to kind of make the attack very costly for the attacker with a lot of measures. And application whitelisting is not the ultimate solution for this kind of attack, but it's just upping the cost.
I wanted to ask, you state in the advantages that you are basically able to stay or fly under the radar, but from my understanding, the operations done on the systems are actually, you're doing different types of activity on the system. So, for example, related to the GPO or firewall changes. So from a CM point of view, this would be quite feasible. So I wanted to ask, how are these advantages actually implemented, or if there are some specific techniques used to basically bypass all this type of possible correlation?
So in first place, thank you for the question. In a standard Windows environment, changes of the GPOs doesn't show up in the log. You have to configure that changes in the GPO infrastructure are in the logs. So this would be the first thing to do. And of course, as we see it in a lot of customer engagements, logging isn't the theme at a lot of our customers. And if there are logs, is the retention time correctly set? Are the logs there? We do have some forensic engagements, and the logs are really crap. So to have a good logging environment and CM in place and so on, this would be a good step into the right direction to first place detect the attack, and in a second place to mitigate it.
One question, thanks for the great talk. On the pen test, when you were done, did you have to any cleanup doing, getting the firewalls blocking again, or did you just remove the DeepSec GPO and everything's good?
Yeah, well, the presented way we did it was a bit idealized. Like, we were working close together with the IT of this company. So of course we cannot change the firewalls of all the productive systems of this company, and open all the ports for our engagement. So we kind of did it as a demo together with them.
Yeah, but if you do some destructive actions on the engagement, do you clean it up?
Normally, yes, of course. And maybe this is an idea for another PowerShell module to delete an existing GPO, for instance, or delete contents of an existing GPO, which were actually done by us during the engagement.
Thank you.
In regards to the logging, if you make a change through group policy and roll that out, does that look different in the logs on the client side? So the firewall change you're making through group policy, if you make that on the machine, it will appear in the logs in a certain way. If you roll out a group policy centrally and ask the system to change the firewall, does it appear exactly the same in the logs, or does it not log in such detail?
You mean just on the client? There will be only, if it's configured, there will be only one notification that the GPO has been updated. But what exactly, depending on your configuration, of course, but the exact changes may not be logged anywhere.
Well, thank you very much. We will continue with the next talk shortly.